Alright, welcome back for part 2 of this video, making a bowl lid. See this hole right here in it? We got some pretty big bug holes in this wood. I didn't want to use epoxy or have to use any cactus juice and put it in a vacuum pot or anything like that. We're just trying to see what we can turn here. So I'm making a lid for a bowl that I've already made. And part of the reason for spending time on this is that at the end of this, I want to try out some different products on this wood, like wood filler, see how that works for wood turning, and versus just regular like a CA glue, and let you see the difference in that before you do a project, and hopefully you'll be able to make a decision on it. Remember, the whole goal for wood turning is to have fun. It's to relax and to enjoy life a little bit, not take it so serious, and just have fun with it. This is one of those things that you don't just pick up and do overnight. It takes practice to learn what to do, what not to do, how to hold the chisel, where to put it on the wood. It also teaches us lessons about life in general, how to have patience, and there's a lot of good lessons in woodworking. That's the reason I enjoy it. When you're working with something like this, something's bound to break. It's always going to happen. But the great part about it is if you're doing it just to relax, you ain't got a customer staring at you. You're not trying to fill an order, make somebody happy with it. You can just relax. You can put it down and go do something else and come back and do a new project. It doesn't have to be the end of the world if something don't turn out right. Remember, over here on the left side where I'm at now is where that big old bug hole was. And the smaller I make this piece of wood, the more of a chance I run to really tear something up here. Notice how I'm standing to the left of what's going on here. If this thing comes loose and flies up in the air, you don't want to be in the direct line of it because it can hurt you.
Daggone boy, that bug hole is way up in there.
That bug hole is pretty deep, so I'm not sure what I'll actually be able to turn out of this piece. I wanted to make a big handle at the top of this bowl lid, but it's looking like it might not turn out that way.
Still a punky piece of wood. Boy, that's pretty though.
I've got some more of this wood in the barn that's dry. It's got a lot of bug holes like this. So for another project, we're going to put it in a vacuum chamber and put cactus juice, which won't fill those big of a holes, but it'll make this like a hardwood. And then for some more projects, we'll do some epoxy resin and make those holes turn different colors and be able to turn something out of it like we want to. But just for this project, we just want to see what can we do with this rotten piece of wood. Right now I'm just working on making the top of the bowl lid flat right here and then trying to shape a handle on the top of it. And you just got to be very careful. This wood's soft, and when you tighten up the tailstock, you can actually see this piece compress on the lathe. I'm prepared in case this piece breaks because I really don't think it's going to make it like I want it to. But if you notice on the right side, there is a dovetail tenon that I've made there. We haven't used it yet. And no matter what happens to this handle, we're going to turn this piece around on the lathe to finish the top that I'm working on now. By the way, notice what a beautiful day it is outside today. While I'm working on this project, I'm actually smoking a Boston butt on the smoker using some dried pecan shavings that I had left over from another project. That pig is straight off the farm from back in October of this year. And the great thing about it is we know what this pig was fed, and there's no chemicals or anything added to it. So that's as good as it gets. Now here I want to start trying to shape the handle. What I'd like for it to be is a big knob on the top. Since it's a tight spot that we're working in, I'm using a V-gouge to try to get in there. Now I'm switching back to my skew chisel and trying to shape the top of this lid a little more flat across there. Just be real careful, take small cuts and push in slow, don't be in a hurry. The closer we get to the center here, the wood becomes more punky and it will start to make your chisel jump a little bit if you're not exactly at the right angle. This runs the risk of actually breaking the piece off. Now I want to readjust my tool rest and make sure that the edge of the bowl lid is actually flat like I want it to be. Still using the skew chisel for this. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to readjust my tool rest. Now we're going to work on this dovetail on the bottom of the bowl lid that actually inserts in the bowl itself. Now that I'm sure that the top is going to work, I can make this dovetail as thin as I want to insert inside of the bowl. The reason I left it thick to start with is just in case I ran into some soft spots on the top of the lid and had to make it smaller. So I would have needed this piece then. Remember, don't get in a hurry with this part. Only make narrow passes with your chisel. Now that I got that dovetail as thin as I want it, I'm going to pick up my bowl gouge and just start to kind of level across the bottom of this piece of wood up to that dovetail that we're going to use on the Nova chuck in a few minutes. Once I get that bottom flat, I'll switch off and check the edges of the bowl lid to make sure I haven't made any chip outs or anything that I need to fix and sand down before I can turn this lid around. Now you can see I'm about to try to make the edge of the bowl lid itself thinner. It's pretty thick right now, and the bowl that we're working on, the wall thickness is only about 1/4 of an inch. So you want the thickness of your bowl lid to match the thickness of the bowl walls so that it has kind of a uniform look to it. It's a little bit of a process to thin this thing down to the size that I actually want it to be. Now I'm going to be taking off the dovetail on the bottom and flatten it all the way across to that center dovetail. Now I'll readjust my tool rest and switch back to the skew chisel to make sure the bottom of this lid's nice and flat. This will help me get all the other chisel marks out of it before we move on. Now that I got that shaped up, you can see there's some chip outs right here. So we're going to go back to the CA glue, put some in, put a little sawdust on top, flatten it out with a stick, make sure it's completely dry, and then pick up your old chisel to kind of knock that bump off and then reshape it again. Remember to make sure that you got plenty of ventilation. You don't want to breathe the fumes from this glue. When you spray the accelerator on the glue to make it dry, if your shop's not ventilated enough, these fumes will irritate your eyes, and it really don't feel too good. Whenever you're ready, spray the accelerator, wait a few seconds, make sure it's dry, and then start turning again. Remember, I was wanting to make a large knob on the top of this lid, but we're dealing with a big bug hole that went in pretty deep right here. So that's really going to determine what I can do. I'm going to give this a try with some CA glue, but this hole's pretty deep. Most people would just throw this piece of wood in the fireplace probably and burn it. And we run a risk by putting this glue in this hole like this, because what this will do is it'll make a hard spot in the middle of where the wood is soft all the way around and cause your chisel to jump, and it's probably going to break.
Put it on X.
Now I'm using this stick to try to pack this into that hole as much as I can. Once I've done the best I can with that, I'll spray the accelerator. And since that's a pretty deep hole that we put a lot of glue in, we're going to need to give that just a minute before we turn. Always remember to use eye protection and stand to the side of this, because if that glue's wet on the inside, it'll sling it all over you. Now that I've got my basic shape of this bowl lid, it's a good idea to go ahead and sand it as much as you can before we flip it around. And before we flip it around to finish the top of the lid, we'll just do a quick fit on the bowl to see if it's going to fit. Sometimes you got to put it back on the lathe and just trim it down a little bit to make it fit, but that's why we cut it big to start with, because it's easier to take off than to put it back. After a minor adjustment, now we've got a nice flat fit, nice and tight. Now I'm ready to flip this around and put the dovetail in the Nova chuck and shape the knob. Once I tighten the Nova chuck onto that dovetail, we'll check it to make sure it's balanced. Once it's balanced, I'll pull up the tailstock and put a little bit of pressure on this just to kind of hold that steady. Now I'll use my spindle gouge and just try to take a little bit off at the time. The wood is very soft here. And so much for that. Now what? Do I just throw this in the trash, or do we see what's left here? At times like this, I remember what Bob Ross said. There's no mistakes, just happy accidents. Instead of getting frustrated with your work when you're turning wood, just remember, you're the only one that's got to be happy with this piece. There's no customer standing over my shoulder waiting for a specific piece that they've ordered. We're just seeing what the wood wants to be. Just take your time here, use your imagination, and see what happens. All right, well, we'll have a little knob for a handle. Looks like it'll be pretty nice though. You can see I used a little wood putty to fill some small cracks. We'll have to see how that turns out once it dries and we sand it. That's it for this video. Be sure to join me for part 3 to see how this turns out.